Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Kleinman, and I'm a research assistant at Weighing In, which is a program at Children's Mercy. And my role is to help coordinate the infrastructure sector work group for the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan. I help assist Laura Steele, who's from Bike Walk KC, and you should see another video from her before this one, which recaps how the KCPA plan has been developed and how groups like Bike Walk KC are taking a leadership with assistance from Wayne In to organize cross-sector conversations and really develop different ways of evaluating and improving rates of physical activity across the greater Kansas City region. This video is specifically providing an update to how the infrastructure sector work group has progressed, and I'll keep it short and brief. So just to review quickly, there's a timeline that we've all been trying to work towards under COVID. It's certainly been a challenge at times, but the timeline involved early survey results that the infrastructure sector work group reviewed. Organizing the sector work group to begin with was a challenge at times, but we were able to draw from a really great group of folks who have experience and wisdom across Kansas City in different aspects of the built environment. Specifically, it relates to priorities such as active transportation, land use, and community design. From the National Physical Activity Plan, we reviewed some of the strategies and tactics and also the survey responses that those individuals who volunteered to take the survey responded to. Some of those tactics and strategies are really great, and some of them needed some work, and we'll talk about that. Throughout June, July, and August, we've had so far 2 infrastructure sector work group meetings. The third one is scheduled for August 19th. Those meetings have been set up to help lead discussion, taking some of what's been seen in the surveys, but really prioritizing what is the most impactful way to improve physical activity specific to Kansas City, and also incorporate some other ideas that maybe weren't addressed at the national plan level, but make sense locally. The intent of all of this is to have a physical activity summit. It says to be determined on the slide, but it's September 10th. And I'll have a link to talk about how to register for that at the end of this video. But the goal is to finalize the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan strategies and tactics for the infrastructure sector, either during that meeting or at a follow-up meeting shortly after. But the goal is to have a set of clear priorities that everyone in the built environment can look at as a way to increasing physical activity across the region. And going forward, the KCPA plan will look to establish partnerships and potential opportunities for funding or pilot projects that can start to live into some of the strategies and tactics and priorities that the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan is establishing. So where this looks at right now, we have a meeting this week leading up to the August infrastructure sector work group meeting, and then you can register now for a September 10th physical activity summit, which will be a morning event, we really encourage you all to register. To recap a little bit, the national plan calls out 5 strategies and 23 tactics as it relates to infrastructure. The highest priority of those from the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan community experts on infrastructure really was about integrating active design principles into how we design our built environment. The survey measured both how important are some of these strategies, but also how likely are they to happen, both ranking kind of their viability, will they work in Kansas City, and their feasibility. Can we get them done in the next 3 years? And across the board, there's a lot of varieties. Some tactics were stronger than others, and we can talk a little bit about that. But the process wasn't based on the survey. The process that we've gone through was actually inviting the participants to take part in a interactive discussion using what we call a Miro board. And that process has involved using translating the results of the survey, including comments, and kind of color coding it. So you see on the right of your screen, there's a column that says important. I know the words are too small to read, but those are the tactics that the infrastructure sector work group, when they came together, we've had 22 participants over 3 meetings so far, really 2 meetings that have dug into this depth of material. Those are the tactics that the participants said were very important for Kansas City and viable and things that we can work on. Some needed some work, and there were a few that just didn't quite register, partially because either they'd already been done before, or maybe they were at a level that the national plan thought would be relevant, but at a local level, it's harder to do either because it's a state policy or something at that level. So you can read on the left those tactics and strategies that were considered important. For example, things like adjusting physical activity outreach so that the words or the message revolves around physical activity and not just exercise, using short term events, improving how we collect data. But there were also additional topics that came up during the infrastructure sector work group meetings, such as having community participation, having more equitable active transportation, and incorporating things like environmental justice and public health into how we coordinate at the infrastructural level in our cities. Things that needed work involved, like I said earlier, some of the more state issues, some of the more policy issues, how to deal with different issues of reform on how transportation funding or safety programs worked. That doesn't mean that these were tactics that the infrastructure sector work group didn't think were important. They did. They just needed to be workshopped a little bit, and that's been the purpose of the physical activity sector work groups. Not important included things like having community bike walk friendly award programs. An example there from the comments was that, you know, this has been done in Kansas City, but it hasn't necessarily moved the needle on increasing rates of physical activity. So it might not be something that the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan ought to champion, just to give you a taste of why these might not be important. That doesn't mean they're not possible, but for a physical activity plan, it might not necessarily be something that we need to lift up. Another example was getting the state government to have local jurisdictions adopt um, zoning regulations. And so that was a challenge that the sector work group said our energy might be better spent elsewhere. So the next step for the infrastructure sector is to really translate, to take some of the uh, tactics and strategies that they've already started to prioritize and have discussions around and translate them, recognizing what the original priorities were, how you might describe them to somebody who's anywhere from 8 to 80 years old, and then trying to identify what programs might align with this. So, for example, you might see that there are tactics such as having physical activity messaging around physical activity, having pop-up event type programs, and then having community input take part. And so how would this get recommended? How would this be translated? How would this be something that we could actually put as a priority from the infrastructure sector work group into the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan that future groups kind of line themselves with on, you know, as they pursue funding or projects in collaboration with one another across the Kansas City region. And so the August 19th meeting will be involving these steps. So taking a couple of the tactics from those on the right, this list, translating them, putting them together, seeing which ones rise to the top, and seeing what partners are there, and trying to define them and name them. These are already a quick summary of the way that the National Physical Activity Plan presents the tactics. So trying to make them unique to Kansas City and also incorporate multiple aspects and facets of how we can work together across the built environment. So one example of this might be, as I said earlier, looking at physical activity outreach and promotion using events and community input. There are programs in Kansas City that are already doing this. Better Block KC is one example. The Fitastic program is one example. The Healthy Community Corridor in Wyandotte County. There are other programs that encourage how to communicate this work. So really getting residents to engage in their existing infrastructure, trying new things to make the community more attractive and usable. How do we make our community safer? Those are the types of messaging that might align with this program. And then naming it. So giving it kind of a way of that can translate across and be a priority for Kansas City. So for example, PA pop-ups or physical activity pop-ups would invite community participation through physical activity events and getting feedback from residents on ways that we can improve the existing infrastructure of our built environment. So you can see how it draws from a couple of tactics, some original contributions as part of the sector work group, and it really starts to emerge as a priority. So for those of you that are in the physical activity sector work group on infrastructure, we would love for you all to come to the next meeting, thinking about how we might use this information, and also come to the PA Summit as well. And there might be examples that you've thought about or lists that you've seen the tactics and strategies, and you might say, well, those three tactics really do align. And those are things that we can put a vision behind for the Kansas City Physical Activity Plan to pursue in the years to come. We'd also encourage you to come to the PA Summit because that's going to be a great opportunity to connect not just with the infrastructure sector, but across all of the sectors that are engaged in the physical activity plan. It is a free event. It's all hosted via Zoom. It's going to be September 10th from 8:30 to 12:30. We have Kelly Cornett from the CDC, who's active in physical activity work. She'll be giving a keynote, but we're going to try to make it interactive and engaging and have a lot of discussion, not just with infrastructure, but across the region and sectors that are involved in physical activity. So you can register there. And you can also take some time to look up the Miro board, which is a opportunity for you to have a direct hand in engaging in this work. This is sort of the artifact of what's been coming over the last few months, but it's really trying to take from these strategies. The tactics have moved down the board, so you can start to see how these different tactics and strategies relate. So these are some of the earlier comments that I had mentioned, and I'll provide a link in the chat so anyone can log in here and have access and provide some feedback if this is a helpful space. If not, feel free to use these lists as references and develop your own. So we look forward to seeing everybody that can make it. And again, there's an event on a sector worker meeting on August 19th and the bigger PA summit. We would really love your attendance, and the registration link will be in the chat box below provided to you as well. And we'll hope to see you there on September 10th. Thanks and have a good day.